light. Have you ever known a blind person? They have the other senses considerably sharpened. I had a blind friend in university and had to read to him sometimes, and he told me how the other senses become far sharpened when one hasn't got that of sight, and you eventually begin to hear a lamppost coming too close. Amazing. He also told me, by the very fact that he always knew who was there, just at one syllable of one's voice, you never forget people. You know them straight away. Now that's physical darkness. The person who goes through life with only the imagination for light. If one has to do with people who have gifts, specifically charismatic gifts, the Lord, it seems, gets through to them to indicate the state of soul of the person before them. They have there an inner sense, a spiritual sense, considerably sharpened. And real charismatics, not the false happy-clappy one, but the real ones who can't be faked, they know pretty quickly the state of a soul. And they say that the way they know is that the Lord lets them feel this notion of light or darkness in the soul. Light. Here it's spiritual light. But then there's something of that we can actually acquire to some extent if we sharpen our antennae ourselves. It happens also to people who are not actually at the initial stage in a state of grace sometimes, so as to get them there. I've heard quite a few times about people who have, from accident or from providence, wandered into the divine presence of the Catholic Church and somehow sensed it. It happens. There was a case some years ago, still in the anti-Catholic regime of the government of the time in Poland, when this son of high-placed communist officials was in the pouring rain, and to get out of it he just came into the first open door he could find. It was a church in which there was adoration going on the altar. Something hit him, and he heard a voice. I exist, and you will be my priest. He was so struck by this objective encounter that he came back the following day to see if it would happen again. And it was there, but slightly less intense in force. And so he came in again, and always it was the same, but diminishing in intensity, because the Lord obviously had got him moving. He went to see the local bishop and said, I want to be a priest. The local bishop knew his family and what they were at, and the influence they had over the area, and he didn't take him very seriously. But your man didn't back down. He insisted, and he indicated his intention and also the firmness of resolution that backed it up, the which made the bishop realize that something had happened. And he became a priest, ordained by that same bishop, and a very, very good one. There was a testimony I was hearing some time ago of a lady who was an extreme anti-Catholic evangelical who, without telling anyone in the family, had one secret consolation. She would go into the only church in the area and feel something there. she just would sit and take it in, and knew there was something there in the distance in the altar area. Eventually she was dying, and her son, who was also of the same ilk, anti-Catholic, all that went with it in the American evangelical style, was with her in her dying moments, and she dared to say this to him before she petered out. "My son, I've never dared to tell you the secret because I know how you would react. At this point I must tell you." And she told him where she would go and why. He burst into tears and said, as they would say in America, "Mom, I never told you my secret. I've been doing the same thing myself for years." My best friend, when I was doing classics, was an ex-Salvation Army boy. As it was his grandmother who brought him up. He, by a strange string of events, also had that experience of knowing that there was something in the Catholic Church. We met. We lived in the same house while I was doing classics, and he was in the seminary where I was living. And in the holidays, he wanted me to go to his family, his grandmother therefore, who was still an anti-Catholic evangelical, or whatever she was. She was certainly not a Catholic. And she would tell me about this one and that one who had had powerful conversions, evangelical style, and things against the Catholic Church. But then I got a message some years later. My friend had by then been ordained to the Catholic priesthood, had written a thesis, a doctorate on ecumenical studies, and had become actually the advisor to Cardinal Hume on all things ecumenical because he was working in the cathedral. But then this bit, his mother, at the age of well into her 80s, had felt something and asked to be received into the Catholic Church, and he received her. What is it about this fullness of light that strikes in the most unexpected places? Well, I remember in student days, another conversion happened. It was one of our students who was doing English initially, but then when it came to her thesis, her MPhil, she decided to do, still in English, a great English author, but to do it on somebody who was also a great theologian, Newman. And she did her thesis on this, the concept of authority in Newman. She had a very clear mind, and we would discuss things, and we would observe things around the university campus. And she came out with this one day, having by then become a Catholic, because she wasn't. She said, it's better if they become Catholics, because even though they might be praying, the mind needs the truth. Now, she had a very clear mind, and that actually is a profound statement. And I know it because it's true. There's an uncomfortable feeling when one is looking around from denomination to denomination, that there's something always of the human there, and that there is a lack of authority and therefore fullness of light. The intellect is not at peace. And then one sees how, when you have the likes of a Newman, who was one of the greatest brains that England had produced, able to write a volume indicating step by step, thought by thought, how it could only be one, and how he himself had to yield against his wishes, then one sees what that lassie, Karen, was also seeing. Mind cannot be at rest until it has that light of true assurance. Not the blessed assurance of which Protestants sing in that mode, but the assurance of the intellect, that despite the life that one might see, the sin that one might see, it's of a different order. The light is of God, and our participation in it is through the intellect and through grace. And that fullness of grace is to be had only there where it led Newman. I just conclude. Father Michael Marr, whom some of you may know, knocked the other day at the door and came in and sat down for about 2 hours, and his beard went up and down, working overtime for those 2 hours, as he told me the latest ecclesiastical news and all I need to know about the past, the future, and everything in between. And he sent me something by post, which I'm devouring, and which I now conclude with. It's this. He wanted to share with me something that had been very puzzling, that happened some years ago. It was an American Episcopalian who was very much into prayer, as was his wife, but he had that problem, and he also would drift towards the Catholic Church privately. With his friend, he went to a celebration, and not knowing the rules, received Holy Communion, which had a huge effect on him. And his friend explained to him discreetly, well, actually, at this stage one can't really do that, and he explained why. But what you can do is go before the Blessed Sacrament exposed and receive grace there. So he started to do that, and things started to happen. One day he came to see him. He was in a strange state of mind, terrified. And he came out with this: I've had a terrible experience. And he explained what it was. And he said, I must see a Catholic priest. I must see a Catholic priest. I need what only a Catholic priest can give: absolution. So his friend had to explain to him, well, look, you want to become a Catholic. I need absolution. If I don't get it, I'm going to die. Now what happened was this. His friend pulled out of him the details of what had happened in a mystical experience before the Blessed Sacrament in adoration. It was this. He had been given an anticipation of the mini-judgment. He had seen his soul, and in that he'd seen all his sins and their gravity, and he'd also seen and been given an infused and instant knowledge of the whole teaching of the Catholic Church, and that it was the only church, the true church. But he had also been given to understand that also a Greek priest, as he put it, could give absolution, but of course they wouldn't, whereas perhaps a Catholic priest might do. Now, this is a long story, I'm shortening it. Because of this question of dying, because the shock was so great, and the insistence that he had it, that he couldn't face, and what he put it, purgatory until the end of time, which was coming to him, he had to see a priest immediately. So this Catholic friend led him to a priest who he knew was very good, theologically aware, and faithful and caring. And they sorted it out amongst themselves. And the last that he heard was what his friend was on the point of being received from the Catholic Church. But, now this is the interesting bit for us, he was shown the difference between what they would call deadly sins and we would call mortal sins, and venial sins, and the way in which there's one thing which Catholics are heading for if they're not careful. It's a very serious judgment on one specific issue: lack of reverence. I leave that with you because it concerns us all. Familiarity breeds contempt.